I just want to talk about something that's come up. Reserve list creatures. I say a lot of the time that they are bad. They're, they're not really good. They're not worth investing in. These kind of things. Now, I just want to explain a bit further about why I say that and what I'm actually trying to convey. So, there's plenty of creatures on the reserve list. A lot of them are from the early part of the game because the reserve list was only applicable to cards in the early part of the game. But you'll see the kind of creatures that they really didn't have good design back then, or they was only just starting to figure out how to design cards better. So you get a lot of creatures with really bad downsides, or you get creatures that cost a lot of mana for very little actual creature-based power and toughness, or for abilities. Now, just having a quick look through, you can see some good creatures like King Suleiman, which can, tap and destroy an Efreet or Jinn, so it's a reusable effect. Then you get other creatures here. If you look through slowly, some are good, some are bad, like Urtai, which is a reusable counterspell where you just sink the mana in. That's pretty good. And then you've got other stuff coming down here. Black Carriage, a 4/4 treble for 5 that doesn't untap, and then you have to sacrifice creatures to untap it. That's pretty bad. I mean, nowadays for 5 mana, you get a pretty good creature. You don't have to get these kind of downsides. And you can see a lot of these Homeland cards were really weak because they'd figure out that maybe they went too far earlier in the game with Arabian Nights and Legends cards, so they just wanted to push it a bit back down. And you get a lot of these just iffy characters, not much, like Elder Spawn. What are you going to do with an Elder Spawn? Like a 6/6. What's the power and toughness that you'd need on this card to make it good? So you're paying 4 and 3 blue, and it can't be blocked by red creatures, and then you sacrifice one of your islands during your upkeep, or it deals damage to you and goes to the graveyard. Like, what power and toughness do you want on this for it to be good? What if it was a 10/10? Do you think that's going to be good? A 15/15? Like, it's very hard to think about it, but what do you want on this template that makes it good? Just having good power and toughness in today's game, it's not even going to get you anywhere. But back then, maybe because removal wasn't stacked in every deck, there wasn't answers all over the place. Maybe a 6/6 was pretty hard to deal with. But nowadays, everyone's strategy is very narrow focused. If you're playing an aggro deck, you've got enough ways to get rid of these kind of things. If you're playing tempo, you can just bounce it and have one more swing, deal 20 damage, gone. But back then, maybe that wasn't the case. Stuff like Master of the Hunt was good for ages because it's just a creature that keeps making extra creatures. That's good value, especially in a game environment where bad creatures exist. Just being able to flood the board is pretty strong. And then you've got some of the Legends creatures are really strong, and then you've got some that are just pretty weak, mediocre. And then you get stuff like Preacher, which is pretty good, but then you get something like a Valdalian Knights, which isn't really good. Now, a lot of things that you need to take into context is how much a card is worth. Like, a bad creature can still be worth a lot of money, and something like Jazam Jinn is a good way to point that out. Today, this is nothing special. A 5/5 for 4 with a downside. It's a bad creature. You wouldn't put this in a deck if you could just have your choice of creatures. But it's got a monetary value because there's not many of them. It's scarce. It's the first expansion set. How many were printed? A few thousand copies. And if you want to play with an old cards kind of feel, then you need to get good old cards. And it's probably one of the better old cards. Like, it's got a really strong power and toughness for a low mana cost. So that's where the minimal demand comes in, and there's so few of them. That's also adding to the value. And then you get stuff like Marton Stromgold, which is pretty good. I had this card in the Ice Age starter I opened, and I thought, wow, that's pretty strong. Um, but it's asking a lot of you to do. You have to actually do a lot of things to make it really good. Um, so it's sort of a build around card, but that doesn't make it really strong. It's the environment that you play it in. So in an environment of Ice Age only, maybe this was pretty strong. But in an environment where everyone's got 10 different Wrath of God spells, one mana removal, creature removal, and everyone's deck can just maybe reanimate, the best creatures in the game, then this card doesn't really become very strong. 4 mana, a lot of stuff in modern. If you're playing modern format, 4 mana, you're going to be getting something pretty good. This wouldn't even be in your choice of kind of cards you want to play, unless there was, a 2 card combo. This plus something else, pretty much wins a game on the spot. Then you'd say, oh wow, that's a good card. But the way people play is very efficient decks. Strategy is already set from the start. You know how many cards you need to beat each type of different deck that you're expecting in the meta, but back then that wasn't the case, so you get a lot of stuff. If Biff. This is pretty good. A 3/3 flying for 4. In green, that's insane. If they printed this in a format today, it could be, pretty powerful, at least in a sealed environment. But if you just got your choice of any creature from the history of Magic, you wouldn't pick this, because 3/3 flying isn't part of a strategy. It's not a synergy. It's not a deck type. It's just a creature, right? And that's what you're getting a lot of in the old cards, especially these ones on the reserve list. They've got some unique ability, but just having a unique ability is not enough. It has to have a powerful, unique ability and be on the reserve list, because then there's unlikely to be any other cards that do the same thing, and then if you want to do that thing, you have to buy that card, that creature. And so you get many of these things. Old Man of the Sea is a pretty good card. I think people realised that when it was out. It's got a good effect, gain control of a creature. So a lot of people, the time and the environment is what really is important when you're talking about is the card good, is the creature good. When you've got today's card list of whatever you want to choose from, a lot of these cards just become really underpowered. Demonic Hordes was great. When I started playing, somebody had a Demonic Hordes, and wow, we were always scared of it. Comes into play, they're going to destroy land, right? And in 10 turns, all your lands are gone, right? And we're playing like 6-player games here. But think about that. He can only destroy 1 land per turn. And by this late in the game, hopefully you've got, 5 or 6 lands, and you're putting stuff onto the board all the time. Is really losing 1 land going to hurt you? Is that person going to spend 4 turns hitting your lands, so you get down to so few lands you can no longer play the game? And if we're playing a 6-player game, there's 5 of you that can do something about it. Why is he just getting free reign to destroy it? But that was a powerful card, and it's a powerful ability. But when you compare it to other creatures now, is that what you want to be doing? Like Ali from Cairo, that's a good card. But no one plays it, probably because there's so few copies available. But that's not an effect. It's not a strategy that you build around, right? And those are the early cards. And as you go further into Magic's time span, Mirage brought a lot of good creatures. Like some of the good creatures that you want to be playing, Mirage Visions brought quite a lot. Like Manowar was a very good creature. It's probably better than a lot of creatures on the list here, on the reserve list. and it's just pretty basic, but it has good stats, a cheap mana cost, and a good ability, and that ability stands up to the test of time. At least when Mirage came out, a lot of the cards that it put into the field were pretty good. Um, not all of them saw play, but you know, they were pretty good. Stuff like this is a bit of a joke card, but it's a unique ability, so it's a good card. It was very hard to play the Phyrexian Dreadnought, but um, that was a strong card at the time. People said, "Wow, that's insane," but it's an artifact. Today you can have your choice of artifact destruction spells. Everything is much quicker, and you've got all the answers. So old cards sort of fall to the wayside. Um, Sliver Queen. Would you play a Sliver Queen if you were trying to win? I mean, let's just pick any deck you've built to play against your friend. Is that really the kind of card that you want? You want to be stuck trying to get the 5 different coloured mana for a 7/7, and once it hits the field, you're going to win the game? No, it's not. Like, you'd be playing something else. You'd be playing a life gain deck, or even the most tuned standard decks would probably beat somebody playing a pile of cards with Sliver Queen, right? Uh, and then stuff like Metalworker. It's not a bad card because what it has is an ability that's very useful in one type of format. So this card becomes strong and worth a lot of money because it's useful in a niche application. And there's not a lot of them in the grand scheme of things. It's an early set, so there's very few printed compared to a rare today. And then you get stuff like this. Unique effects, Great Whale, come into play. There was a few cards from the set that did the same thing, untap the lands. But, that hasn't been reused much, so you don't really see those kind of cards. Chronotog had its time in the sun. Bogodan Phoenix was very strong when that was out. There's a whole deck built around it. But today, is that a good card? Is this what you want to be playing? I mean, maybe not, because it doesn't hit the bar good enough. It can't create a reasonable pathway to a win fast enough to beat the decks that are around today. And that plays a lot into these cards. You just got Morphling. I mean, you probably wouldn't play a Morphling today. It's not that good. You definitely wouldn't play Lightning Dragon. I mean, at the time, it was pretty good. You got something fairly strong for the mana cost, but the Echo, like today, you wouldn't play probably any card that had Echo, because, especially if it's a creature, because what do you want? You just want a creature on the field and you're going to pay the mana cost twice? Probably not. The only stuff you're going to play in creatures these days is creatures that impact the board. If they're unanswered for a turn, you get massive value. Things like that. So this and Deranged Hermit's another one. You probably wouldn't put it in a deck today because it's not strong enough. Peacekeeper was a good card back in the day. Su-Chi's got no use. You've got weird stuff like the Dwarven Thaumaturgist. And then the Abroth I talked about in a video. It's not very good. So remember, playing something from the reserve list is probably not always the best idea just because it's a reserve list card. I mean, Griselbrand is probably a better card than most of the black creatures on the reserve list. Craterhoof Behemoth is probably better than all of the green card creatures that are on the reserve list. So you got to think about, Ragavan. It's probably better than most of the choices here in red creatures. That's what the things you need to be a bit more specific about.